up, everybody? It is big old J-Dog here. What's up, everyone? Volume up. Let's go. Thank you very much for tuning in for yet another episode of the Off-Grid Podcast. This week's guest, absolute belter. Loved it. This week's guest is Megan Hine. She is a survival consultant, presenter, and author. She's the behind-the-scenes safety of some of the biggest adventure shows out there, including TV with Bear Grylls and working with MrBeast. She also holds a degree in psychology to translate high-risk fieldcraft into clear decision-making under pressure. In this conversation, we cover so much. I absolutely love this one. We got into loads of different little topics because she's such a varied character. So in this conversation, we talk about Megan's adventurous childhood and how running away became a career, the science behind why our primal brains struggle in the modern world, how to decompress after intense stress, confronting identity when your passions are taken away, challenging stereotypes as a female survivalist in the media, why younger generations are struggling with resilience, working 15 years alongside Bear Grylls, and why the TV industry is struggling, and Megan's transition to YouTube and working with MrBeast. Guys, I hope that you absolutely loved this episode as much as I did. Let's get into it. On with the podcast. Megan, welcome to the Off-Grid Podcast. Thank you very much for coming on. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to dive into it all.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that really intrigued me doing the research for this podcast and looking into what you do is how you connect science with adventure. And you also hold a degree in psychology because you're so interested in it, and specifically in the stress response. So where I wanted to start was what actually led to that interest in psychology, kind of beyond survival techniques.
Essentially because I'm a big nerd. That's what it comes down to. No, I'm that really annoying person. So when I was at school, I found it really hard to sit still and be within like four walls. So it was like I had like this real anxiety, and I just wanted to be out running around in the mountains and things. I grew up in Worcestershire, and like on the Malvern Hills were like behind the school, and I just wanted to be out mountain biking all the time. But like I guess as I've sort of become understood things a bit more and sort of gone through diagnosing things and being diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, and that kind of, I suppose, sort of makes me understand why I struggled in the classroom setting. But now it, like, if I'm that really annoying person in like group sessions and things, it's like I've got a question. I've got so many questions, and that's what I love about the work that I do. But with the psychology side of things. So I started working in the outdoor industry when I was 17. I started out as an outdoor instructor, then kind of fell into the bushcraft survival things, kind of did a 3-year apprenticeship in bushcraft and survival, and picked up my outdoor qualifications, went along. So my 18th birthday present actually was my mountain leader assessment, which was,
Wow.
Kind of wild. Like thinking back on it now, it's kind of wild. And I picked up various other like climbing qualifications and things at the time, and then it started doing expeditions. So initially through this bushcraft company that I was doing the apprenticeship with, I went off and we were doing very much anthropological based expeditions. So going out and spending time with indigenous cultures, learning some of their skills, and then going and putting their skills into practice. And then I started leading for the likes of like World Challenge, which is a big youth expedition company. So I did quite a lot of stuff for them, and then fell into the TV world. And I suppose through all of this, I kind of was going off to these amazing places, spending time with indigenous peoples, spending time pushing people out of their comfort zones. And I just became really fascinated, particularly with the question of, why do some people in survival situations walk out and others perish? And that became a real fascination for me. And in the early days of the TV industry, so I got involved originally with a show called Man vs. Wild, which was the show that really launched the career of Bear Grylls. And at the time, when we first started doing those shows, nobody knew how big it was going to be. Like, there wasn't the same sort of health and safety and things as, there wasn't there wasn't anything else like it at the time. So we had this amazing like creative freedom. The budgets were bigger, we had more time. And we just went out and played. And it was like, we were on some of the shows that we were doing, we're literally taking people and dropping them into, essentially survival situations, which, we wouldn't be able to get through the boards of ethics if this was an actual study.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's so much fun. And I mean, gosh, I feel like when I look back on some of it now, I'm just like, actually, there's sort of ethical boundaries potentially that we were exploring. And it sort of really got me thinking, we're putting people into these situations and seeing the way that people interact in survival situations, but also on a slightly softer way of like going out and taking people out into the outdoors, and like the many hundreds and hundreds of people that I've accompanied on journeys over the past years, without a fail, they have a life-changing experience a lot of the time. And there's something really powerful about nature. So yes, the survival side of things is like that kind of hardcore survival got me thinking about the very primitive mechanisms within our brain, and then this sort of softer approach of actually spending time outside, sitting around the campfire, and that's like, there's something amazing about sitting around the campfire you've got a group of people there that have never met before, and it's like, they're talking about their deepest, darkest secrets they probably never shared with anyone else. And I should probably sign NDAs with like these things. But it's amazing, isn't it? It's like we've all done it, sitting around the fire, and there's something about it, and it's just like, the potential. It's this untapped resource for therapeutic application, and essentially returning to our roots. So I became really, really interested in like the evolution of the stress response and looking at that compared to modernity, essentially like the way that we live today in this incredible world that we've created, but we've adapted to it, but we haven't evolved to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned when you're sat around that fire, I've been there, and it's an incredible experience that I think everyone has. Just looking at a flame or sitting around a fire, it's just immediately breaks down all of those barriers that you have of any sort of social awkwardness, perhaps to do with the darkness as well. No one can really see your face too much. But it's an incredible experience when you're going through what is ultimately quite primal activities, like sat around the fire and things like that. And you touched on it a bit there, this idea of like our primal minds have evolved to help us survive. But now we're in this modern environment, which to some extent is completely alien. How have you found that transition of all of our primal minds now trying to exist in this world where instead of meeting up in person, we do a podcast on a video call?
Yeah. It's really affecting us, and I have a book coming out next year actually that takes a dive into all of this. But this is it does essentially like anxiety, depression, obesity, all of these things that are autoimmunity are symptoms of this modern world that we've created. If we sort of break it down sort of very simply, within our brains there's like essentially two different characters that live in there, and that there's an amazing book about this as well. It's called The Chimp Paradox, which
I've read it.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating read, and it's and this is where I find it fascinating that we've essentially got two beings within our brain. We've got this very primal part of the brain, which is called the limbic system, and that essentially you've got your senses like your eyes, your ears, that are constantly scanning the environment for risk, and that limbic system is its primary function and role is to keep us alive, is survival. So it's highly attuned to any movement in the environment, to any potential or perceived threat. And when it perceives something, so there's a little rustle or there's a movement in the bush, out in the jungle, it's just like, there's, my eyes have been caught and there's a jaguar and the big cat out there, and that's what it's designed for. It's designed to spot those tiny little movements of, like, from a time in history, in our history, when we were prey, we were predated upon by larger animals, and it was designed to switch on very, very quickly and go into fight, flight, or freeze. So essentially fight for our lives, run away, or play dead. And that system still lives within our brains, and it's incredibly powerful. And it's within all animals, and it's incredibly powerful. It switches on very, very quickly. That's how, if you knocked a wine bottle off the table, hey, you've managed to catch it without even thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that reaction. Is so fast. And then we've got what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is the other part of our brain, which is, the way I think about that, that's the human part of our brain. That's where we live, essentially. That's where logic and reasoning, problem solving, the ability to communicate, connect, make plans, to bond, etc. That's where that side of it that lives. But it takes a huge amount more energy to get that up and running. So it's slower than this very primitive limbic system. So it's always behind, which is why, when that email comes through that's really triggering and you've totally misread it, and you're just like straight away like, oh yeah, fucker, and like back it goes, and then you're just like, and then the logic and reasoning, like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And that's why in that moment it's like so important, like, to recognize that. And I think, for me, a big part of this is like, if you're aware of something, whether it's a behavior, a trait, it goes a long way to sort of understanding and acceptance of, like, I've got this very primitive part in my brain. It's like absolutely amazing. But if I get that email, or if I see somebody's perfect life on social media, it's going to trigger me in exactly the same way as if, that jaguar is about to attack me out of a bush.
Absolutely incredible. It's amazing when you're able to combine your experiences with education and, like, really understand what's actually happening to our minds, because I feel like a lot of us go through life maybe questioning, like, why are we feeling like this? Or, whoa, how come I'm reacting in that way? And it's sort of like this curious introspection we have that can be sometimes quite hard to really understand what the hell is actually going on in our own heads. But one thing I found, just looking into what you get up to, your career and your life, is you always seem to be in some sort of state of doing. You're kind of here, there, everywhere. You're around the world. You don't really seem to kind of maybe stay in the same space for too long. And I just wanted to ask, given your experiences in survival, but also your education in psychology, what is it like to be you in your head?
That's a very good question. I think I've been asked that before. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it is like, actually, where does those behaviors come from? And if I remove myself kind of from the picture and like look at it, through that maybe psychology training and things, I suppose, although I had an upbringing where I had opportunities to participate in sport, to go into the outdoors. Like, my dad was really he'd done a lot of expedition work as a geologist. He loved mountains and exploring the wilds of the UK. So I grew up with that, but I also grew up, there was dysfunction as well, and that particularly for a maturing brain, is if you're constantly in that kind of fight, flight, freeze response. Because, like, I suppose, like, my response was to run away, and it's like made a career out of running away. So initially it was like through mountain biking. I found mountain biking quite early on, quite by chance. And then I was out every day doing it, because there was something about, like, the movement that was almost like leaving stress and anxiety and things behind, and powering through. And it was like that constant movement. And it's such a good question. I think this is something that a lot of very successful or high achieving individuals also kind of face, and it's like when you actually kind of go back to look at particularly like the roots, because yes, we've got this, we've got the limbic system and we've got the prefrontal cortex, those bits that we've talked about, but those aren't the only things that influence our behaviors. It's also our childhoods, particularly the first 7 or so years of our lives, when our brains are really malleable, they're growing, they're basically wiring themselves that's with programs that will play out for the rest of your life. So oftentimes if you're dealing with somebody who's throwing a bit of a tantrum, you know that you're dealing with a toddler, or that like email that comes through that's that's quite triggering, and somebody's obviously been triggered and they've written this email to you. You're like, actually, this isn't about me. This is like this toddler who's obviously being triggered by something that had also triggered them when they were 3 or 4 years old. And suddenly, like when you start looking at people like that, so I think initially sort of made this career as being on the move, all the time, and became addicted, I suppose, to exploring these amazing parts of the world, and seeing where I could go, answering all these questions that I had in my mind. And but yeah, I guess sort of just pre-COVID, I was, at the time I was away sort of 10, 11 months of the year, bouncing between different environments. I was managing multiple projects. This was all film work, in like adventure survival shows, and these were some big projects. So I was managing, so I was managing a project in Panama, and then I was dealing with another one that was about to, like another production that was about to kick off in China, and kind of back and forth, and it was like it never ended. We had like a couple of weeks off in the summer, but the rest of the time was on the go all the time. And that, combined with sort of politics and things that was going on at the time, was that it went. I've been away for sort of 3 months, I suppose, on a show in Norway, and came back, and I can't really remember anything about these past 3 months. It's really, really weird. So I went to see my doctor, and she diagnosed me with burnout. So and that, I think that is, that's a symptom. That's what happens when you've got people that are constantly on the go, or feel the need to constantly fill their time, even if it is through exciting things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there something that really kind of gave me a bit of smack in the face there, which was that you kind of made a career out of running away, and that you kind of only realize these things sometimes when you learn about yourself in retrospect. And that's why it can help you make sense of things, but only when it's in the past. And I found that myself, because I grew up, my childhood, I was always in the outdoors. I grew up in a very small village, running around, and that became a huge part of my identity and who I was I'm Jake. I'm super fit. I love adventure. I run around the whole time. And then earlier this year, I actually had to confront one of those nuggets in my head, which I didn't even realize was there, because I got a quite severe knee injury, and it meant that I couldn't do any of that anymore. So I couldn't really walk. Even now, still, I can't go and adventure. I can't really do all this fitness. And I had this moment of kind of confronting my identity and being like, okay, so who are you? Who are you without all these things?
Yeah.
Has there been a moment for you where everything's been stripped bare and you've had to sort of confront yourself?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'm really sad to hear that that's happened to you, because it is horrendous, and it's like your very identity is questioned, and it's like you can't be out doing things that make you feel good, and
Yeah.
that's really, really hard. For me, early on in my career, I picked up Lyme's disease, and I'd been working in the Lake District. I must have been like, I guess, 20 maybe at the time. I picked up. I was working for this bushcraft company doing this apprenticeship, and I'd been pulling ticks off me all summer, and then I had a month off, and went out to the Alps, climbing, which was, climbing is such a big passion of mine. Went out to the Alps for a month climbing, and I knew I'd got a bullseye rash on my hip, which is a a sign of Lyme disease. So I knew what I had, but I didn't realize how serious it was. And, you know, when you're that age and you're just like, I need to be climbing and like, like need to be sending, like getting up. And this rash kind of just spread all over my body. And I was like, I'd be like curled up at the bottom of crags, like with this migraine. I was so stupid, like in hindsight. But essentially just forced it into my central nervous system. And it took about 2 years to get it back out again. And then that triggered an autoimmune condition and things. But at that time, it was like my doctor basically said to me, you need to stop or you're going to kill yourself. And that for me was like this wake up moment, because I was still training, I was still going out and biking and still going to, you know, work in the woods. And, you know, I was waking up and then like I'd have Bell's palsy, which is like where, like, for me, it was like half my face was paralyzed, and I still have like a weakness on one side of my face from it. And yeah, but my doctor said, you've got to stop. And at that point, yeah, it was like the very identity. It's like, who am I without all of this? And I can't move. I can't go off and do this. Like it's awful. And you're just like kind of stuck with your inner demons. And I think that happened to a lot of people through COVID and lockdown. You know, I think because, yes, you know, you're obviously very similar to myself in that, like, we find our solace and our place in adventure. You know, whereas for some people it might be going to the football or going to the pub with friends and things. And we lost all of that. And it's like suddenly identities, or you have to sit in your headspace with all of these, like, you know, these inner thoughts.
Yeah, that can be a scary place, hey? When you've got no distractions anymore. You're just
You
left
know,
with yourself. Those are the moments where I think for a lot of people, who particularly people who like to keep busy, that can be actually sometimes the scariest thing, is actually just sitting with yourself for a bit, and sort of going, okay, what do we do now? But it's super clear that your mindset is incredibly strong, and also your strength of character as well is something that really comes through in all the work that you do and the career you've had from such a young age, with all your outdoor experiences, all the way through to going on TV and being in the public eye and things like this. And I think it's quite clear, if you were to look at your career, that you're tough, because you're a survivalist, and these words are associated with that sense of toughness. But one thing that I got from looking at your journey was actually what was happening behind the scenes, and on the labels of what you're doing, because you're turning up on some of these shows as this well-dressed, well-made up lady on a TV show who's a survivalist, and you've had people point out that those two things could possibly seem like a contradiction. What do you make of all that?
well, firstly, can we organise this every Thursday where you massage my ego and I like this is awesome.
I'm not cheap.
Yes. So I at the beginning of the year, actually, I was promoting a show called Extracted, which I did a little bit on screen for, and was doing quite a lot behind the scenes in safety, managing sort of the safety of that. So part of the promotional side of it was getting to go on these like morning shows and evening shows and things in New York. It was a really cool adventure. It was like completely sort of out of my everyday, which it was really cool. So part of me like going out, because in the past, I suppose it's like always like when I first started, was like I felt like I had to dress like the boys and kind of really fit in. And I guess as I've sort of got older and things, and less worried about that, because I've become more comfortable with my own skills and ability, if you like. And I think that was a bit of a test. It was like, I suppose, sort of me playing the system a bit, because I knew that I should be rocking up like with a explorer's hat on, or like looking at that. And I was like, do you know what? Why should I? Like, why should I not be wearing pink or like go? And so it was a bit of an experiment, really, to see what would happen. It's like I don't get the opportunity to dress up very often, so I was like, sod it, I'll go like this. And yeah, it was like exactly got that response was like, you don't look like a survivalist. And it's like, well, what does a survivalist look like? Our brains go instantly to a very small handful of characters that are in the media, and that's where our brains go. But the reality is, having spent so many years dropping people off into situations and seeing how they operate. You know, each one of us is a survivalist. You know, we wouldn't get to where we are. You know, we wouldn't still be alive if we weren't. And we're all resilient in our own ways. I guess that's my worry is, I suppose, at the moment, is like sort of younger generations, and resilience. And I think there's a lot more that could be done around getting younger people back outdoors again, for sure.
Am I right in thinking that you find it quite annoying that education now thinks that we need to teach resilience, that you're more concerned with what happens after that? And if so, what's your view on that? On our sort of new generations coming through and being taught resilience?
Yeah, so I'm not annoyed with the fact that we're teaching it. What I'm annoyed with is the fact that we have to teach resilience because we are resilient. Um, you know, unfortunately now, and this is a huge generalization. I know that not all children are brought up this way, but you know, we're now in a society where both parents need to be at work. Childcare is expensive. When both parents are exhausted from working long hours, long days, and it's quite easy just to sit children down with an iPad or with the screens, with games, and for them not to actually go outside and spend time. Whereas when I was a kid, it's like we were kicked out as soon as we got back from school. Like we were outside, off exploring at the weekends. We were out walking, and being taken out, no matter what we thought and no matter what the weather was doing. It was like we were going, and and that now, I think, because there's so many alternatives, and the way that the sort of, I suppose, gender structure, like roles, etc., have evolved, it's very difficult for parents now. And this is why I think what the Scouts are doing with their skills for life is so good, because resilience, it comes from exposure to challenge. So even having a young person go and learn a musical instrument, take up sport, go and communicate with people that they wouldn't normally communicate with, these are all things that build resilience, because we don't want to push them so hard out of their comfort zones that they end up sort of having a trauma response to that situation. But it's something that needs to be done from a young age to encourage young people out, push themselves out of their comfort zone, because long term that will build confidence and resilience. And my husband is currently undertaking a PhD in human performance, military funded. And what he's doing is so fascinating. So he's studying military, and he's also studying the civilians as well. But with the military side of things, they're quite fascinating, because I remember going down to Lympstone with a presenter that I was working with, to the Marine training base, and just being blown away with how many young men were in their rehab clinic. And I was asking the staff about that, and the fact that, because young people haven't necessarily grown up running around outside, falling out of trees, etc., their bones aren't as strong. So when they have to run around with 50 kilograms on their backs, or even like wearing the military boots to do their exercise in, they're experiencing stress fractures and things. So there's all these different sort of facets. So I'm frustrated that we have to to be able to teach these things, and also sort of figure ways out of fixing that problem.
Yeah, talking about survival and evolving and adapting to your environment, you got to think what sort of environment the new generations are in now and how they're evolving. Their minds are being shaped, and I mean, like obviously, I was growing up kind of falling out of trees and things like that, but I wouldn't say that my experiences were to the extreme, perhaps, that you were having at a young age, because I know that when you were 13, you went on your first solo wild camp. You also were part of the cadets, where you were put forward for a test in the Royal Marines, one of the first women to try out that test. So all of these very unique experiences, it almost feels like you kind of had no choice but to confront stereotypes to build resilient. That was your experience of having to really confront all these stereotypes and really build that in yourself?
Yeah, and the whole female thing has actually, for me, has only become something that I've been aware of more recently. Through my, when I was at school, and yeah, I got to be, as part of the military cadets. Through all of that, I never questioned the fact that I was the only girl, and I was very fortunate that I got to go and do lots of adventurous training. Without female cover, which would never happen now. And I think because they knew that I was there for the adventure and the climbing, I wasn't interested in I wasn't there to. So it's like I got to share, we're out in bothies and winter in Scotland, and just dossing in with the boys. And it's like I never went through my. It's probably quite naive, really, but it's like I never really never thought about the sort of the female side of things, and I was always performing at the same level, if not higher than the boys that I was out with anyway. So it sort of never really went through my head. And the same with climbing and mountain biking and things. I suppose it's only more recently, and I guess that's as you climb the ladder of your career ladder, and there become less places at the top. It's like any sort of cracks in your armor, get exploited, and unfortunately gender still is that. It's not, it's not as outward as it was, say 20, 40 years ago. But it's society's messaging. It's I catch myself doing it as well. It's like you see some women will tell me, oh, I'm off mountain biking, and it's at the weekend, and it's like my brain automatically goes to the fact that she's probably going with her boyfriend or her husband, and and that's just the fact that I do that sometimes, that doesn't bode well for everybody. It's just how we're programmed, or how this messaging, and it takes a long time to change that. And I think as women, there's I've sort of seen various adventure Facebook groups for women and things, that I sometimes get sort of mildly frustrated with, because there's so much blaming men. But to move forwards, we have also to take ownership, because that same messaging that that little boys might be growing up with is, we're growing up with that too, and we need to change that mindset ourselves, and not doubt the fact that we belong here too, and we're as capable of performing in these environments.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of strength in that. Just understanding from what it sounds like in your experience from a young age that actually you were just looking at your ability and if you were capable of doing those certain experiences, and then you were. So there was no real question. It's like, oh, great, I'll just muck in and do what we're doing here. Obviously, you are working in TV as a survivalist and looking after different TV crews. And obviously, you're kind of in this alpha environment where it's all about survival and things like that, and working with Bear Grylls as well, who's mentioned that you're tougher than 99% of men that he knows, which I feel like is a massive stamp of toughness from the nation's hard nut. But yeah, what are those experiences like working in TV? What's it like working with Bear and behind the scenes?
Yeah, so I worked with Bear for about 15 years, full time. So I got to go travel around the world with him, and there was sort of three of us, I suppose, that were part of his core team that would, one of us or a combination of us would be on every show that he was on, and we would be responsible for the survival sides, but also creating the journeys. So the journeys that you would see, that you'd watch, with the we created those. And then I suppose I started transitioning into larger formats. So I started doing sort of heading up the Indian productions for them, which were sort of bigger scale, because whereas we would maybe have sort of 15 people that come out on location and film, I'm now operating, we've now got sort of 250 people who are all on boats with people that can't swim, all over the ocean, and you're trying to wrangle them into one place, and I don't have a safety team that's big enough, and you've got people who are jumping off because they want to go swimming and they can't swim, and they're jumping off the boats, and it's just my goodness, there's like, this is chaos. But it was
Chaos.
so much fun. Yeah. And then I suppose around COVID time, I thought it was a good opportunity for me now, because I've been part of this team for so long, and we've been at the forefront of sort of adventure filmmaking for such a long time, and I was really interested in exploring like other aspects of filming. So I then started, I suppose the past 7 years I've been now working on like really big scale adventure survival shows, which have been like sort of more sort of competition side, where we've got a sort of 350 odd crew wandering around the jungle and things, and you've got like, at that point you've got like whole art departments and things that are operating out. So it was sort of went from just the pure adventure and like guiding to suddenly like the logistics of generators and larger numbers of people still operating in those same environments, and that's been really, really fun. And then the industry is a bit quiet at the moment, so I've taken this year to sort of really kind of build some, like, and pitch some projects that I've been thinking about for quite a few years. And so that's sort of, I suppose, the past couple of months, that's what I've been working on. That's really exciting.
Awesome. Can you share any?
Not at the moment. I really want to. I'm like so excited because we've got this one project that is just like it'll be a big TV show, and we're so close, but I just don't want to I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah. I'm already so excited because it just sounds like, obviously when you started off with Bear and these like tight knit teams with 15 people, that's super cool, and like going out there, having a good play around and things like that. Maybe with some of the moral guidelines creating a bit more fun than safety, which is great. But now you're just talking about sheer scale, and the scale seems to come with the amount of people in that particular TV crew. Obviously, you're in charge of, I guess, what would be safety and survival for the TV crew in these remote locations. One thing dealing with natural disasters and things like that, but I feel like it's a whole other thing dealing with unpredictable people and politics and these things that we bring in to the mix. How has that changed your role and the way that you do things?
Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting point, that because often on these bigger productions, and I guess it's going back to what you were asking me earlier about running away from your demons or whatever it might be. There is something about the industry that draws, like, creative people are incredible. Their brains are like able to dream up things that don't exist, and being able to work with people like that. But you've also got to be really aware of the fact that oftentimes creative individuals can be sort of, I suppose, the mental health side of things sometimes comes to play. And it's like when you've got such a big crew and you don't know why, you don't know the ins and outs of everybody's lives and why they're there, and things. And you've got to be really careful. We're operating in places where there's access to what would be illegal drugs here, and so you can't lock everybody in, and so those that starting to deal with things like that, and also some of these environments and these places we're operating in are inherently quite dangerous. There's a lot of opportunistic muggings, burglary. There's sort of much higher risk when you're dealing with larger numbers of people, and particularly people that aren't necessarily specialized in adventure. So yeah, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different facets, and that's where for me it's like I need to have like a fantastic medical team with me. So the one sort of the beginning of the year sat with 350 crew, and like we have a medical team of sort of 6 paramedics that are on rotation, and they're local Panamanians, so they've got access into the medical care. We've got 2 ambulances that we can sort of move around with us as well, that like off-road ambulances, and then the health and safety team and the safety team, like the more adventure safety team as well. That all falls under my jurisdiction, if you like, and then I work very closely with what we call like the challenge department. Helping them design the sort of adventurous challenges. Yeah.
Wow, so much to deal with. And it's also, I think, that pressure's so clear because it's like, well, you're the person, you know, you got 300 odd people looking for you for the direction. And it's clear that, you know, you're going 10, 11 months of the year, 24/7 on the clock. And you mentioned experiencing burnout as well. After these projects that you're on, how do you sort of bring yourself back down? How do you decompress and connect back with yourself?
But basically, when I get back off a job, like particularly longer job like that, it's like I can't function for about 4 days afterwards. So, I've got a really good friend that looks after my dogs when I'm away, and she's incredible. And she used to live in just near Aberdeen. So I'd fly back in like usually to Aberdeen, and to go pick up the dogs. And it's like she'd always like insist that I stayed with her, and I was like, I literally couldn't talk to her for about 4 days. I'd just be like just sat there, like I could like go out for walks, and that was about it. And it's just like it takes so much sort of brain power, because you've got to be aware of where everybody is. And you know, because there's also you've got the environmental risk, and you know, all the risk around it. But you know, we're also trying to achieve something very, very quickly, because with film crews, we tend to come together for I'll typically be out there very early on in the process, so I might be out there for 3 months, but then the film crew itself comes in and they're only there for sort of 3 weeks. And so it's really, really intense. And it's like, because budgets now have got so tight, the filming itself is really, really intense. And because these are multi-million-dollar projects, there's only a very, very short window of time. There's so much pressure, like from the network as well. So it's constantly like back and forth with like the creative side of things as well. So it's uber intense. And yes, you kind of come back off, and then I sort of slowly like release myself back into society.
Wow. Yeah, that's a process for sure. Trying to sort of, I guess, first just sort of be a vegetable for a few days, get
Yeah.
back to a bit of solitude and not have to manage hundreds of people. And then, yeah, slowly wean yourself back in. You mentioned the future. You got a few exciting projects coming up. I know you're also off to an expedition in Svalbard. What's next for you? What's ahead for you in the years to come?
Well, I'd really love to like this project I'm working on at the moment. You know, whether hopefully this one will move forwards. It's ridiculously exciting. But otherwise, you know, having the opportunity to be able to create these other things, because we're at a point now with filmmaking. So like the TV industry, like particularly adventure survival stuff, is kind of on its knees at the moment, because the traditional broadcasting, so like the channels, the networks, are really struggling financially. There just isn't the viewership that there was in the past because of the TikToks and the YouTubes and things. Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. So from that part, it's like part of it is like terrifying, because suddenly, you know, I know people that, you know, haven't, like from the TV world, that haven't worked in a couple of years. Like it's horrendous. Like the situation at the moment is awful. Um, and and like the whole industry is like that. It's very, very quiet. But there's so much potential with, like, you know, with the YouTubes and the TikToks, and like if you can evolve to embrace this new era of content creation. So I've been working with on some of MrBeast's projects over the past couple of years, because I was really interested, because his projects are so successful, and like what they have to, you know, all of his team live in Greenville in the States, and they've just got this amazing, like huge machine that purely makes his content. They're building like the biggest studio, I think, in the world at the moment there. It's craziness. And it's just, I was so fascinated with how somebody can take, you know, what essentially is very simple concepts and manage to draw in so much viewership. And it's like, well, how does that then cross over? So he was recently doing a show commissioned by Amazon, and so Amazon had brought me in for the safety on there when they were going out of the studio, so onto the remote islands, to be brought in for those bits. And it was really fascinating to see that crossover between a more traditional form of like that 45 minutes combined in with that MrBeast-esque style of filming.
That's incredible. It's just this content manufacturing machine that just churns out Mr. Beast content. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way the world's going, with people wanting everything on demand to watch it when they want to watch it, as opposed to tuning in at 7 p.m. each week, as you would on traditional TV. How has that transition changed your particular role? Have you found it a different environment to work in, or the role itself is different now you're working in this sort of YouTubification of content?
Yeah, I find it really fascinating. So I guess throughout my career I've worked with different cultures like around the world, and I love that. So it's like you go into a remote Amazonian village, and the culture is quite different to here, and it's like learning about that. So when the work that I've done with him and his team was, I approached it the same way. This is a different culture to what I'm used to, and it's like kind of like, well, how do you come in and how do you like speak the same language? How do you like communicate? Particularly when I know that I've been brought in as one of the grown-ups in the room, to like make sure that nobody dies, which is like there's a high chance with some of the stuff that they're doing that somebody might. So it's like how do we like allow them, like essentially, if you like, it's like basically building the sand pit for them to play in, and making sure that they don't hurt themselves. So like building like the soft edges and things in. And so for me it was then finding a way of being able to work with their teams, which they're so successful. These really young guys who've like shot to notoriety and are very, very successful, and they're dominating the industry. They're obviously doing something right within that, but with young guys that have never experienced failure, there's often the attitude, sort of, I suppose, life hardens you a bit. It teaches you that some things don't always go as you want. So it's like kind of, I suppose, bringing in that sort of realism, if you like, but being able to do it in subtle ways where you can build layers of safety and things in, where either it's feels like it's come from them and that they built it in, or like not saying no. So they've got this whole handbook about dealing with people that say no to them. So it's working around ways of being like, well, if you do that, you're going to die. But have you thought about this instead? Like, let's not go shooting cannons at other people because it's going to hurt somebody. And let's just turn the boat slightly so we're barring out to sea.
Wow. God, that sounds like a whole new exciting adventure for you in a very different environment. Obviously, still in like that same core role, but God, that just sounds so exciting. And yeah, just talking to you about your career and your life, that's one thing that I've got so much, is just a sense of energy, just a sense of exploration, adventure, and wanting to really live life. And I know that that's a big part of your philosophy, being the hero of your own life and really, happening to it, taking control of it. So I've got a massive sense of that in this short call that we've had. And thank you very much for the conversation. I've absolutely loved it. Cheers, Megan.
Thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye bye.